She had a shotgun pressed against her chest and she smiled. Not the smile of someone who had given up. Not the smile of someone broken by fear. It was the slow, steady smile of a woman who had already calculated every single move in the room, including the one the man holding the gun hadn't thought of yet. The three armed men who stormed into that diner at 2:15 in the morning thought they owned the night. They had no idea they had just walked into her world. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The night Nora Hayes turned 24, she made herself a quiet promise. She promised herself she would not spend the rest of her life being afraid. It wasn't a dramatic vow. There were no candles, no ceremony. She was sitting alone at the counter of the West Side Diner after her shift, eating a bowl of soup that had gone lukewarm, looking at her reflection in the darkened window across from her, and she just decided, no more fear. She'd had enough of it growing up. Fear of the landlord's knock, fear of the lights getting cut off, fear of what her father's medical bills would look like when they finally arrived. She had spent the better part of her childhood ducking her head and holding her breath and waiting for the next bad thing to land. But that night alone at the counter, she put down her spoon and straightened her spine and told herself never again. It's funny how a promise like that gets tested. The West Side Diner wasn't much to look at. It sat on the corner of Pulaski and Ohio, sandwiched between a check-cashing place and a laundromat that smelled like cigarettes and fabric softener. The sign outside blinked and always had, probably always would. The stools at the counter were held together by duct tape and stubbornness. And the coffee was the kind that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since the Carter administration. But it was open 24 hours, and at 2:15 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, it was exactly the kind of place people went when they had nowhere else to be. Nora was behind the counter refilling the napkin dispensers when the door opened. She didn't look up right away. That was the thing about working nights for 4 years. You developed a feel for the rhythm of the place. The door opened, you gave it a second, you read the energy before you even made eye contact. Most of the time it was nobody. A cab driver looking for coffee, a college kid who'd been out too late, a woman walking home from a double shift who just needed to sit somewhere warm for a few minutes. So Nora gave it a second, and then she heard the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't an explosion or a scream. It was the sharp mechanical sound of a gun being cocked. A single decisive click. The kind of sound that cuts right through everything, through the hum of the refrigerators, through the low crackle of the radio behind the counter, through the fog of an ordinary Tuesday night, and lands somewhere deep inside your chest like a stone dropped in still water. Nora looked up. There were 3 of them. The first one through the door was tall and wide-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. He was the one who'd made the sound a semi-automatic pistol held low, but visible, pointed at the floor but ready. His name, Nora would later learn, was Marcus. He moved like a man who'd done this before. Controlled. Deliberate. The second one was younger, barely 20, maybe less. Wiry, with nervous hands and eyes that jumped around the room like a pinball machine. He had a shotgun that looked almost too big for him, and the way he was gripping it told her everything she needed to know. His trigger finger was too tight. He was scared. Scared people were the most dangerous kind. His name was Jesse. The third man walked in last, and he was different. He didn't hold a weapon. He didn't shout. He didn't pace or scan the room the way the other 2 did. He simply stepped inside, let the door fall shut behind him, and stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, taking in the diner the way a man takes in a property he is considering purchasing. He was somewhere in his mid-30s. Dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown. He wore a charcoal gray coat that probably cost more than Nora made in 2 months, and he moved through the world with a specific kind of ease that comes from never having had to rush, from never having had to beg, from being the kind of man that other men were afraid of. His name was Sebastian Gallo. And in the hierarchy of Chicago's criminal underground, his family name was not just recognized, it was respected. It was the name whispered in courtrooms and boardrooms and back alleys alike. The Gallo Syndicate had its fingers in so many corners of the city that half the time people didn't even know they were living inside it. They just knew that certain problems got solved quietly, that certain debts got collected without paperwork, and that certain men wore tailored coats and never carried their own weapons. Sebastian Gallo was that man. What he was doing in a diner on Pulaski at 2:15 in the morning, that was a question for later. Right now, he was here. "Everybody down!" Marcus's voice cracked through the room like a thunderclap. Two couples at the booths near the window hit the floor immediately. An older man near the back, a regular named Clarence, who came in every night for decaf and pie, knocked over his mug, reaching for the seat in front of him. A young woman near the door let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like the air being forced out of her lungs all at once. Jesse moved fast, the shotgun coming up as he swept toward the counter. "Cash register, now hands where I can see 'em." Behind the counter, Nora set down the napkin holder she was holding. Slowly, she placed it on the shelf. She turned around, and she put both hands on the counter palms, flat, and she looked at Jesse with an expression so devoid of panic that it stopped him just for a moment mid-step. "Take it easy," she said. Her voice was level, conversational, like she was talking someone through how to reboot a router. "The register's right here. I'm going to open it for you." Jesse blinked. "What?" "The register," she repeated, nodding toward the machine beside her. "You want the money? I can open it. Just take a breath." He stared at her. The shotgun was still up. His knuckles were white around the barrel. "Did you just tell me to take a breath?" His voice cracked on the last word. He was young, she could see now. Too young, way too young for this. "I did," she said, "because you're holding that thing like you've already decided to use it, and I don't think you actually want to. So let's all slow down, and nobody has to make a decision they can't take back." From the back of the diner, Sebastian Gallo had not moved. He stood exactly where he'd entered, and his dark eyes had drifted from the frightened patrons on the floor and settled entirely on the woman behind the counter. He was watching her the way a chess player watches a movie they didn't expect. Marcus pushed past Jesse and leaned over the counter, his pistol pointed directly at Nora's face. He was close enough that she could smell the cold air still on his jacket. "Open the register," he said very quietly, "and don't be cute about it." "Already planning to," Nora said. She didn't flinch, she didn't lean back. She held his gaze and reached slowly for the register and hit the release button, and the drawer slid open with its familiar mechanical ding. Marcus glanced down at the tray of bills. His expression shifted, a flash of something. Disappointment. Frustration. "That's it," he said. "Tuesday night, 2 in the morning, Nora said. "What were you expecting?" He slammed his hand on the counter. "Don't get smart with me." "I'm not being smart," she said, and there was something almost gentle in her voice. "I'm being accurate. There's maybe $400 in that drawer. Credit cards all go through the system. There's no cash backup here. If you were expecting a big score, this isn't it." Jesse had moved around to the end of the counter, shotgun still raised, and he grabbed the open tray out of the register and started pulling the bills out with one hand. His movements were sloppy, rushed. The bills were scattering. "Jesse, slow down," Marcus snapped at him. "We gotta go, Marcus. We gotta go. I said slow down." While the two of them argued, Nora's eyes swept the room. Clarence was still on the floor near the back booth, and she could see that he was pressing one hand to his chest. Not wounded, but scared. Too scared. Clarence was 73 years old and had a heart condition she knew about because he'd mentioned it once while she was refilling his coffee. She filed that information away. The couple near the window, a man and a woman, both around 30, the woman had her face buried in the man's shoulder. He had his arm around her and was staring at the floor and doing the right thing, staying still, staying quiet. The young woman near the door had pressed herself back against the wall and had both hands up in front of her face, trembling. Nobody was going to do anything stupid. Good. Nora turned her attention back to the men in front of her. "You need to leave in the next 4 minutes," she said. Both Marcus and Jesse turned to look at her. "What did you say?" Marcus said. 4 minutes, Nora repeated calmly. "Maybe 3.5 now. The nearest patrol unit to this block makes a pass every 11 minutes. I've been watching it for 4 years. You can set a watch by it. The last one came by at 2:08. That means the next one's due at 2:19. When the officer sees the door hanging open and the lights on with people on the floor, he's going to call it in, and then you'll have backup arriving inside of 6 minutes after that. So 4 minutes to get out clean. 3 if you want a comfortable margin." The room had gone completely still. Jesse had stopped pulling bills from the register tray. He was staring at her with his mouth slightly open. Marcus hadn't moved. He was watching her with an expression that was halfway between rage and something that looked uncomfortably like respect. "She's bluffing," Jesse said, but he didn't sound sure. "I'm not," Nora said. "I have no reason to bluff. I want you to leave. The fastest way to make that happen is to give you accurate information." "She could have hit a silent alarm," Jesse said louder now, the panic creeping back into his voice. "Marcus, she could have hit it already." "I didn't," Nora said. "There isn't one. The owner applied for the system upgrade 6 months ago. It hasn't been installed yet." She paused. "That's not something I'd know if I was trying to trick you." Another silence. And then from the back of the room, from the spot by the door where he'd been standing, perfectly still for the last 4 minutes, Sebastian Gallo spoke for the first time. "She's not bluffing." His voice was low and even. It carried the room without effort. Marcus turned to look at him. "Boss?" "She's telling the truth." Sebastian hadn't moved from his spot. He was still watching Nora. "Take the money and go. Now." Jesse didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the tray and bolted for the door, pushing past the young woman against the wall, who let out a sharp cry. Marcus hesitated. He kept his pistol trained on Nora for 1 more second, his jaw tight, his eyes hard. "Smart girl," he said. It didn't sound like a compliment. "Go," she said quietly, "while you still can." He went. The door swung shut behind them. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the diner moved or made a sound. Then Clarence from the back booth let out a long, shuddering breath and started trying to get up off the floor. And Nora was already moving, already coming around the counter, already reaching for him, already saying, "Easy, Clarence. Easy, I've got you. Just sit down, just breathe." "Lord have mercy," Clarence managed. His hands were shaking badly. His face was the color of old paper. "Lord have mercy, girl." "You're okay, what?" she said, getting him into the booth. "You're okay. Just breathe, nice and slow." The couple near the window were helping each other up. The woman was crying quietly into the man's shoulder. The young woman by the door had slid all the way to the floor and was sitting with her knees pulled up, staring at nothing. Nora moved through the room like she had a list. Clarence first, then the young woman. She crouched down in front of her, hands on her shoulders, voice low and steady. Hey, look at me. You're safe. They're gone. What's your name?" The woman blinked. Alicia. "Alicia, I need you to take a slow breath for me. Can you do that?" She did, shaky but real. Good. You're doing great." Nora squeezed her shoulders gently, then stood up and reached for the phone on the wall behind the counter. She dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, her voice was so calm and clear that the woman on the other end of the line actually paused mid-response and said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Nora said. "The suspects have approximately a 2 to 3 minute head start traveling on foot. I'd suggest focusing your search north on Pulaski. There are no injuries. One patron may need a medical check for cardiac stress. He's elderly and was frightened. Please advise the responding unit before they enter." She paused. "And please knock before you come in. I don't want anyone else scared tonight." She hung up. She turned around. Sebastian Gallo was still there. He was still exactly where he'd been since the moment he walked in. He hadn't rushed out with his men. He hadn't dropped to the floor with the other patrons. He had stood completely still throughout the entire thing, and he was standing there still with his hands in his coat pockets watching her. The way he was watching her made the fine hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Not from fear, from the distinct uncomfortable sensation of being studied. "You should go," Nora said. "Police are on their way." "I know," he said. He didn't move. She held his gaze. "Is there something I can help you with, sir?" A corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the ghost of one, the way a smile looks on a face that doesn't practice it very often. "I'm trying to decide," he said slowly, "whether what I just watched actually happened." "It happened," she said. $400, 2 scared men, and 1 patrol schedule. Nothing complicated." "You memorized the patrol schedule." "I pay attention," she said. "It's free." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket, and Nora didn't flinch, though every other person in the room seemed to collectively hold their breath, and he pulled out a slim leather wallet. He set it on the counter. He opened it, and he counted out a stack of bills, and he laid them on the counter in a neat, even stack. "For the damage," he said. Nora looked at the money, then she looked at him. I don't need charity, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. It might have been surprise. It might have been something else entirely. It's not charity, he said. Then what is it? He reached into the other pocket and pulled out a business card. No name, no company, just a phone number printed in clean black type. He placed it on top of the stack of bills. Call it a down payment, he said. And then Sebastian Gallo buttoned his coat, turned toward the door, and walked out into the rain, leaving the money, the card, and a silence so heavy Nora could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest. She stood behind the counter for a long moment looking at the card. A down payment. She knew what that meant. She was not naive. She had grown up on the west side of Chicago, and she knew exactly who the Gallos were, the way everyone in certain zip codes knew, not from news articles, but from the specific way adults changed the subject when that name came up in conversation. From the way certain debts disappeared. From the way certain problems got handled without the police ever being called. She knew. She picked up the business card. She looked at the number, and she put it in her apron pocket. The police came in just under 4 minutes. They came in exactly the way she'd asked they knocked first. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. The next 40 minutes were a blur of badges and clipboards and questions she answered calmly and completely. The young detective who took her statement, 26, maybe 27, clearly exhausted, kept stopping mid-sentence to look up at her with an expression she'd been seeing a lot tonight. And you weren't scared, he said finally, like it was the question he'd been working up to. Nora thought about that for a moment. I didn't have time to be scared, she said, which was almost true. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that she had learned a long time ago that fear was just information. It was her body telling her, pay attention. Something important is happening. And the moment she recognized it for what it was, just an information, she could set it aside and get to work. She'd learned that the hard way. She'd had a good teacher, but that was a different story for a different night. By the time the last officer left, it was nearly 4 a.m. The diner was empty. The spilled coffee had been cleaned up. Clarence had been cleared by the EMTs and gone home in a cab with strict instructions to call his daughter, which he had grudgingly promised to do. The couple by the window had left. Alicia, the young woman by the door, had recovered enough to refuse a ride home and walked out with her chin up, which Nora respected. Nora sat at the counter alone. She reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out the business card. She looked at the number for a long time, then she turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that was precise and unexpectedly neat, were 2 words she hadn't noticed before. You're wasted. She stared at it. Then, despite everything, despite the cold and the adrenaline wearing off and the bone-deep tiredness setting in, she let out a single short, quiet laugh. She slipped the card back into her pocket. She started turning off the lights. She didn't know it yet, but that card was about to change everything. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was afraid she'd already made her peace with fear a long time ago. She didn't sleep because her mind wouldn't stop moving, turning the night over and over like a stone in her palm, examining every angle, every crack, every surface. The shotgun, the sound of Marcus's boots on the linoleum, the way Jesse's hands shook when he grabbed the register tray, the way the money scattered across the counter like it didn't mean anything at all. And Sebastian Gallo standing completely still in the back of the room, watching her like she was a puzzle he'd already decided to solve. She lay on her back in the dark, staring at the water stain on the ceiling of her apartment, and she thought about 2 words written in neat, precise handwriting on the back of a business card. You're wasted. She didn't know whether to be flattered or insulted. She settled on neither and got up at 6 a.m. to make coffee and start the day like it was any other one. It wasn't. Her phone rang at 6:47 a.m. It was her manager, Dale, who owned the diner and had been getting calls since 4 a.m. from both the police and the local news station, and who was in a state somewhere between furious and terrified and grudgingly impressed. Nora, he said without even a hello, I need you to tell me you're okay, and then I need you to tell me exactly what happened, and then I need to sit down. I'm okay, she said. They took the register money, about $400. Nobody got hurt. The police have the case. Nora, his voice dropped. They're saying you talked them down. I gave them information, she said. There's a difference. Wow. A pause. What kind of information? The kind that made leaving seem smarter than staying. She took a sip of her coffee. Dale, I need to ask you something. What? The security system upgrade, the one you applied for in April. When is that getting installed? Another pause longer this time. How did you know about that? Because I know everything about that diner, she said. When is it getting installed? Next month, he said quietly. Maybe. The quote came back higher than I expected. Okay, she said. We'll talk about it when I come in. Nora, I'm fine, Dale. She set down her coffee cup. I'll see you at 5. She hung up. She looked at the business card on the kitchen table. She turned it face down, and she went to get ready for her day. So, the problem with trying to live a normal life after something like that is that the world doesn't reset with you. It keeps moving at the same pace it always did, but you've shifted just slightly, just enough, and suddenly everything around you feels like it's running about 3 seconds behind where you actually are. Nora felt it at the grocery store. She felt it on the bus. She felt it most acutely when she got to the diner at 5 and walked in to find Dale standing behind the counter with his arms crossed and an expression like a man who hadn't slept, either looking at the empty space where the register tray usually sat. Insurance is going to cover the cash, he said before she'd even taken her coat off. Good, she said. The detective called again. Wants you to come down to the station tomorrow and look at some photos. I'll go in the morning, she said. Nora. Dale waited until she looked at him. He was a big man, thick-shouldered, with the permanent squint of someone who'd spent too many years under fluorescent lights. He wasn't soft and he wasn't sentimental, and that was exactly why what he said next hit her the way it did. What you did last night, that was either the bravest thing I've ever heard of or the most reckless, and I still haven't decided which. She looked at him for a moment. Does it have to be one or the other? He stared at her. Then he let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Go clock in, he said, and thank you for keeping everybody safe. She nodded once. She tied on her apron. She went to work. The dinner rush that night was different. She could feel it from the moment the first customers came in, a kind of charged attention in the room, people looking at her a half-second longer than usual, whispering behind their menus. Someone had talked. Someone always talked. By the time the evening hit its stride, she'd had 3 separate tables ask her with varying degrees of subtlety if she was the waitress from last night. She said yes, took their orders, and refilled their coffee without elaborating. The 4th person who asked was not subtle at all. He was a man about her age sitting alone at the counter in a jacket that was just slightly too nice for the neighborhood. He had a notebook open in front of him and a press badge clipped to his lapel. She clocked it the second she walked over, and he had the particular energy of someone who had rehearsed his opening line. Excuse me, he said. Are you Nora Hayes? Depends on what you're selling, she said. He smiled. I'm a reporter. Chicago Tribune. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about... No, she said pleasantly. Can I get you something? The soup tonight is chicken and wild rice. Ms. Hayes, this is actually a really compelling story. A young woman facing down armed robbers, keeping her cool, potentially saving lives. It wasn't potentially, she said, and I'm not interested. Soup. He blinked. Okay, sure. Soup. Great choice, she said and walked away. She was in the kitchen ladling the soup when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something stopped her. She answered. Ms. Hayes? The voice on the other end was calm, low, precisely modulated. She recognized it immediately, the way you recognize a particular key change in a song you've only heard once, but that your body somehow already knows. Sebastian Gallo. Her hand tightened on the phone. Her face stayed exactly where it was. You have this number, she said. It wasn't a question. I have most numbers, he said. How are you this evening? Working, she said. I'm at work. I know, he said. The soup tonight is good. The chicken is a little overcooked, but the broth makes up for it. She went very still. You're here, she said. 3rd booth from the back, he said. I didn't want to be presumptuous and sit at the counter. She hung up the phone. She picked up the soup bowl. She carried it to the counter, set it in front of the reporter without a word, then turned and walked to the 3rd booth from the back. Sebastian Gallo looked exactly the same as he had at 2:15 that morning. The same coat, the same stillness, the same dark eyes that picked her apart, remember the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. She sat down across from him without being invited. You need to understand something, she said, keeping her voice down. I am at work. There are people here. I would like you to say whatever it is you came to say quickly and clearly, and then I would like you to leave. Fair enough, he said. He didn't look surprised by her directness. He looked satisfied, like she'd confirmed something. I'll be direct. I have a problem that I think you can solve. I solve problems with chicken broth and decaf, she said. Whatever you need, I'm not the right person. You defused an armed robbery in under 7 minutes, he said, using nothing but information logic and a level of composure that I have not seen in men 3 times your age who've been in this business their entire lives. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with your self-assessment. She looked at him. What kind of problem? The kind that requires someone who can walk into a room full of frightened, armed, unpredictable people and come out the other side with everyone still breathing. He paused. I have meetings, negotiations, situations that escalate when they shouldn't because the people involved are emotional and the people managing them are worse. I need someone who can read a room the way you read that room last night. You're asking me to work for the mob, she said flatly. I'm asking you to work for me, he said, as a crisis management consultant. You would never touch anything illegal. You would never be in legal jeopardy. You would simply be present in certain rooms, in certain conversations, and you would do what you do naturally, read people de-escalate, keep the temperature down. That's a very clean description of a very complicated arrangement, she said. I'm aware, he said. That's why I'm offering you a very significant amount of money. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. She didn't pick it up. She looked at it for a moment, then back at him. Whatever's on that paper, she said, isn't enough. Something shifted behind his eyes. You haven't looked at it. I don't need to, she said. My answer is no. He leaned back slightly. Can I ask why, ma'am? Because I'm not naive, she said. You don't bring someone into your world and keep them clean. It doesn't work that way. The moment I walk into one of your rooms, I'm part of it, and I don't want to be part of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your father is Vincent Hayes. The air between them changed. Nora didn't move. She kept her face where it was, kept her hands flat on the table, kept her breathing even. But something in her chest tightened like a fist closing around something fragile. That's not relevant, she said. He owes money, Sebastian said quietly. Not cruelly. That was the worst part. He said it the way a doctor delivers bad news factually and without pleasure. Not to me, to people I know, people who are less patient than I am. The silence that followed was enormous. How much? She said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Enough, he said. The kind of number that doesn't go away on a waitress's salary. The kind of number that has a timetable attached to it. He paused. I can make that number disappear, Nora. Completely. No repercussions. No ongoing obligation for your father. Clean slate. She stared at him. In exchange for working for you. In exchange for a trial period, he said. 60 days, you come to 3 meetings. You observe. You advise me on what you see. If after 60 days you want to walk away, you walk away. The debt is still gone. That part is unconditional. Nothing is unconditional, she said. You're right, he said. Almost nothing. But this is... She searched his face. She was very good at reading people. She'd been doing it since she was a child, in a household where reading the room correctly was a survival skill, and what she found in Sebastian Gallo's face was not what she expected. There was no manipulation in it, no predatory calculation. There was something else, something that looked almost uncomfortably like honesty, which scared her more than the manipulation would have. I need to think about it, she said. Of course, he said. He stood, buttoned his coat. You have my number. I have your number, she agreed. He walked to the door and then he stopped and turned back and said quietly enough that only she could hear. For what it's worth, Ms. Hayes, I looked into your father's situation after last night. I wasn't planning to use it as leverage. I want you to know that. Then why did you bring it up, she said. He looked at her steadily. Because you deserve to know all the information before you make a decision. You told my men that last night. I was paying attention. He left. Nora sat in the booth for exactly 45 seconds. Then she got up, walked back to the counter, picked up a coffee pot, and started doing her job. She went to the police station the next morning. She sat across from the young detective. His name was Reyes. She learned Daniel Ray is 28 years old and running on 3 hours of sleep and gas station coffee, and she looked at the photographs he spread across the table in front of her. She identified Marcus immediately. Jesse took her a moment longer. The photograph had been taken from a distance, and he looked younger in it than he'd looked holding a shotgun at her chest, which was a thought that did something unpleasant to her stomach. "You're sure?" Richie said. "Positive," she said. He made a note. He gathered the photos. He looked up at her and did the thing she'd noticed people doing a lot lately. The double take, the slight recalibration, like they were expecting someone different. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can tell me it's none of my business." "Ask," she said. The man who was still in the diner when we arrived, one of the other patrons mentioned a man in a gray coat who left just before we got there. Nobody else got a good look at him, but you described him to the officer on scene. He looked at her steadily. "Did you recognize him?" She looked right back at Reyes, and she thought for just a moment about what honest actually looked like versus what useful looked like. "No," she said, "I didn't recognize him." Reyes studied her for a long beat. He had good instincts, she could tell. The kind that came from seeing a lot of situations where the surface and the truth were operating in separate rooms. "Okay," he said, "if you think of anything." "I'll call you," she said. "Thank you, detective." She stood to leave. "Ms. Hayes," his voice stopped her at the door. "Whatever happened in that diner last night, you handled it right. Most people would have panicked. You didn't." He paused. I wanted to say that." She nodded once. "Most people don't realize that panic is a choice," she said. "Once you figure that out, everything gets simpler." She walked out into the cold. She called her father that afternoon. Vincent Hayes lived 40 minutes south of the city in a small house with a broken gutter he kept meaning to fix and a vegetable garden he'd been tending since Nora's mother left. He was 58 years old, and he had the particular quality of a man who had once been strong in a very specific way and had spent the last decade trying to figure out who he was without that strength holding him up. He answered on the second ring. "Nori." He always called her that, had since she was 3. "Hey, Dad." "I saw the news," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm completely fine." "They said there were guns, Dad." She kept her voice steady. "I'm fine. I handled it. I need to ask you something." A pause, the kind of pause that told her everything before he said a word. "What's going on?" she said. "With the money." The silence that followed was the longest she'd ever heard from him. It was the silence of a man who had been hoping very hard that a specific conversation would never happen. "How did you find out?" he said finally. His voice was smaller, older. "It doesn't matter," she said. "How bad is it?" Another pause. "Nori." "Dad, how bad?" He told her. She closed her eyes. The number was exactly as bad as she'd feared. Worse because of the timetable. And worse still because of who he owed it to, not a bank, not a credit card company, not anything with paperwork and a process and a legal framework around it. Something older and less formal and considerably more dangerous. "I was going to handle it," he said. He sounded ashamed in a way that cracked something in her chest. "I've been working on it. I have a plan." "What plan?" she said gently. He didn't answer, because there wasn't one. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad, don't do anything. Don't call anyone, don't make any agreements, don't sign anything. Just sit tight. Can you do that?" "Nori, what are you? Can you do that for me?" A long breath. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I can do that." "Good," she said. "I love you." "I love you too, kid." His voice was rough. "Be careful." She hung up. She sat with her phone in her hands for a long time. Then she pulled up the contacts she'd saved that morning under no name, just a single asterisk, and she typed 3 words. "I'm in." When the response came back in under 30 seconds. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll send an address." She put her phone down. She looked out the window at the gray Chicago sky, at the clouds moving fast and low over the rooftops, at the city, going about its ordinary business, like the ordinary city it absolutely was not. She had just made the biggest decision of her life. And she had made it the same way she'd done everything else that mattered, calmly, clearly, with both eyes open and a full accounting of the cost. The card was still in her apron pocket. She left it there. The address Sebastian sent her was not what she expected. She'd spent the night building a picture in her head, some anonymous building in a part of the city where nobody asked questions, or maybe a restaurant with a back room, the kind of place where the front half served pasta to regular people, and the back half served as a courtroom for people who weren't regular at all. She'd seen enough movies. She had a whole architecture of assumptions ready. What she got was a law office. 16th floor of a building in the loop-clean glass and polished stone, with a receptionist who smiled at her with the particular warmth of someone who had been trained to make people feel welcomed and watched at the same time. The lobby smelled like expensive coffee and new carpet. A man in a suit that matched the decor appeared from a side hallway and introduced himself as Paul and asked her to follow him, and that was it. No weapons check, no blindfold, no ominous elevator ride to a basement. Just a conference room with a long table and floor-to-ceiling windows, and Sebastian Gallo sitting at the far end with a cup of coffee and a folder open in front of him, looking like he was about to conduct a quarterly review. Nora sat down across from him. She did not take off her coat. "Good morning," he said. "Let's skip the pleasantries," she said. "Tell me what I'm actually doing here." He nodded. He appreciated that she could tell the way certain people appreciate having their time respected. "There's a meeting this afternoon," he said. 2:00. I have a business arrangement with a man named Carver, Arthur Carver. He's been a reliable partner for 4 years. 2 weeks ago, he stopped being reliable." "Define reliable," she said. "He processes certain financial transactions on behalf of my family's interests," Sebastian said, choosing his words with surgical precision. "He's good at it, or he was. Something changed recently. His behavior in our last 2 conversations was erratic, defensive in ways that didn't match the situation. My instinct says he's either skimming planning to run or being pressured by someone outside our arrangement." "And you want me to sit in the meeting and read him?" Nora said. "I want you to observe," he said. "You won't be introduced as anything specific. You're a consultant," which is true. "What do I do with what I see?" "You tell me afterward," he said. "That's all." She looked at him. "That's all." "That's all," he said. "For today." She studied him for a moment. "What does Carver think this meeting is about?" "A routine review," Sebastian said. "He doesn't know anything is wrong." He paused. "Or he knows we know, and he's going to try to convince us otherwise. Either way, I need a read I can trust." "Why don't you trust your own read?" It was a pointed question. She asked it on purpose, partly to get information, but mostly to see how he handled being challenged directly. A lot of powerful men, when questioned, either deflected or got cold. She wanted to know which kind he was. Sebastian leaned back in his chair and looked at her with something that was almost amusement. "Because Carver and I have known each other for 9 years, he said, and 9 years is long enough to develop blind spots. It was a more honest answer than she'd anticipated. "Okay," she said, "I'll observe." Arthur Carver was 54 years old, with the soft, careful manner of a man who had spent his career being indispensable to people who scared him. He came into the conference room at 2:03, apologizing for the 3-minute delay with the particular over-sincerity of someone who had been rehearsing their apology in the elevator. He shook Sebastian's hand. He sat down. He opened his own folder with the careful movements of a man trying to appear unhurried. And then he noticed Nora. His eyes moved to her just briefly, less than a second, and then moved away again. He didn't ask who she was. That was interesting. Most people in a professional meeting would at minimum glance at the unknown person in the room and wait for an introduction. Carver chose not to ask, which meant either he was so practiced at meetings with unfamiliar faces that it didn't register, or, and Nora thought this was more likely, he was working hard enough to maintain his composure that he couldn't afford the extra attention. Sebastian introduced her as a consultant. Carver nodded and smiled and moved on. The meeting began. It was on its surface exactly what Sebastian had described: a routine review of financial activity numbers and timelines in the dry procedural language of business. Carver had documents. He referred to them often, more often than necessary. Every time the conversation moved toward a specific 3-week window in September, his hand moved to the folder in front of him, not opening it, just touching it like a reassurance. Nora sat with her hands folded on the table and watched. She watched his hands. She watched his breathing. She watched the way his eyes moved, where they went when he was comfortable, where they stopped going when he wasn't. She watched the micro pauses before his answers and measured them against the complexity of the questions. Simple question, long pause. Complicated question, fast answer. The opposite of what you'd expect from a man being honest. 20 minutes into the meeting, Sebastian asked casually slipped between two other questions, like it was an afterthought about a transfer that had been processed on September 14th. Carver's hand pressed flat against his folder. Standard processing, he said. Smooth. Practiced. He'd prepared for this one. The timeline on that one shifted because of the banking window on the receiving end. I documented it. It should all be in the bottom. He was already opening the folder, already reaching for a paper. That's fine, Sebastian said just as smoothly. I'll review the documentation later. Carver closed the folder. His shoulders dropped exactly 4 millimeters. Nora noted it and said nothing. The meeting ended at 3:15. Carver shook hands again, gathered his things with the careful efficiency of a man who wanted to leave but didn't want to appear to want to leave, said his goodbyes and was gone. The moment the door closed, Sebastian turned to Nora. Well, he said. He's scamming, she said. Not planning to run. He's too emotionally invested in appearing trustworthy, which means he still wants the relationship. Running would be easier, and he doesn't want easy, he wants clean. But something happened in September that he's trying to document his way out of, and the documentation is probably partly real and partly constructed. She paused. He's also scared of someone. Not of you, he's uncomfortable with you, but it's managed discomfort, the kind he's used to. This is different. This is fresher. Someone put pressure on him recently, and whatever they want is the reason the skimming started. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. The September transfer was $43,000, he said quietly. I found the discrepancy 2 days ago. Then you already knew, she said. I knew the number, he said. I didn't know the why. He closed his own folder. You got all of that from watching him in a meeting. You get a lot from watching people, she said. Most people don't watch. They wait for their turn to talk. She stood up and reached for her coat. Nora. She turned back. Sebastian had both hands on the table, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked like he was choosing his next words carefully in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. I want you to know the arrangement I described yesterday. The thing with your father, that holds regardless of what you decide to do going forward. I've already made the call. She went very still. You already. This morning, he said, before you came here, before I knew whether you'd walk through the door. She stared at him. Something was moving in her chest that she didn't have a name for. It wasn't gratitude exactly, and it wasn't suspicion exactly, though it had edges of both. It was more like the feeling of stepping into a surface you expected to be unstable and finding it solid, an adjustment your body makes before your mind catches up. Why, she said. Because I told you it was unconditional, he said, and I meant it. She didn't say thank you. She wasn't sure why it wasn't ingratitude. It was something more complicated than that. Like saying thank you would make the exchange smaller than it was. I'll be at the next meeting, she said. She left. She called her father from the parking garage. He answered on the first ring this time, which told her he had been waiting. Nori, his voice was different, lighter. Like a tension she'd grown so used to that it had become background noise had suddenly gone quiet. How did you? It's handled, Dad, she said. It's done. A long silence. She could hear him breathing. She could hear the particular quality of a man trying not to cry in a way that made her chest ache in a very specific way. It had been aching since she was about 9 years old. You didn't have to do that, he said. His voice was rough. Yes, I did, she said. Don't argue with me about it. Nori, I need you to do something for me, she said. I need you to promise me that whatever got you into that situation, whatever the decision was, whoever the people were, it's over. You don't go back. You don't rationalize it. It's done. I promise, he said, immediately. No hesitation. I swear to God, Nori, I'm done. She believed him. She believed him in the way you believe someone when the thing they're promising costs them something to say. Okay, she said. Good. She paused. I love you, Dad. I love you more than anything, he said. You know that. I know, she said. She hung up. She sat in the parking garage for a few minutes, not driving, not moving, just sitting with the strange, uncomfortable, complicated feeling of having done something that was right and wrong at the same time in proportions she hadn't fully calculated yet. Then she started the car and drove back west. The second meeting happened 6 days later. This one was different. Not a conference room, not polished stone and expensive coffee. Sebastian sent her a different address, a private dining room above a restaurant in River North. When she arrived, there were already 4 men at the table. She'd never seen any of them before. Sebastian stood at the far end, and when she came in, every head in the room turned to look at her. She recognized the feeling. She'd felt it in the diner every time the door opened late at night. The recalibration, the assessment. She let them look. Sebastian introduced her the same way he had with Carver, a consultant, nothing more. 2 of the 4 men accepted this without visible reaction. One, a heavy-set man in his 60s, with the permanent expression of someone who considered everything a personal insult, looked at her for 3 full seconds and then turned to Sebastian and said directly and without apology, "What is this?" "I told you," Sebastian said mildly. "A consultant." "She's 24 years old," the man said. 24, Nora said before Sebastian could respond, "and not invisible, mister." She let the pause sit there waiting for him to fill it. He did reluctantly. "Briggs," he said. "Mr. Briggs," she said pleasantly. "I appreciate the directness. I'll try to live up to it." She sat down, folded her hands, and looked at Sebastian. "Whenever you're ready." Briggs stared at her for another moment. Then something in his face shifted just barely, just a fraction. He turned back to the table. Sebastian began the meeting. This one was about territory. The word never actually used, but present in every sentence like a word written in invisible ink. There was a dispute about distribution routes on the north side, and the 2 men who weren't Briggs were representatives of the interests on the other end of that dispute, and the meeting was meant to produce an agreement that everyone could sign off on without anyone having to escalate. It escalated anyway. It escalated 9 minutes in when one of the representatives, younger, sharper-edged, with the specific impatience of someone who'd been told to close the deal and didn't particularly care how, slid a counter-proposal across the table that made Briggs go from red-faced to white-faced in about 2 seconds. "That's not a negotiation," Briggs said, his voice dropping in a way that was much more dangerous than if it had gone up. "That's a demand. It's a realistic offer," the younger man said. "It's an insult," Briggs said. "And if you think, Mr. Briggs," Nora said it quietly, not loudly, quietly the way you speak to someone who is standing very close to an edge. He stopped. He looked at her with an expression that said he was about to say something extremely unpleasant. She met his eyes calmly. "The percentage they're proposing of it," she said, "is 2 points off from what you open with, not 20. 2. She slid the paper back to the center of the table without looking away from Briggs. "And the thing you're actually upset about isn't the percentage." Silence. Briggs's jaw moved. "What would you know about what I'm upset about?" "You're upset because they sent someone junior to a meeting you've been waiting 3 weeks to have," she said. "That's the insult, not the number." She turned to the younger representative. "I think what Mr. Briggs needs to hear, and what would actually move this conversation forward, is an acknowledgement of that. Not an apology, just an acknowledgement." The younger man looked at her. He looked at Briggs. Something passed between them, not warmth, not exactly, but the functional equivalent of 2 people deciding that continuing to fight was costing them more than giving a little wood. "The delay in scheduling wasn't a commentary on the importance of this meeting," the younger man said. "It was stilted and clearly not what he would have said on his own. But he said it." Briggs looked at the table, looked at the paper, picked it up. 2 points, he said flatly. 1, the younger man said. 1.5, Nora said. "Oh." Both men looked at her. "Split the difference. Nobody wins 100%. Both sides leave with something. Meeting's over in 10 minutes. Everybody goes home." She looked at Sebastian. Sebastian looked at both sides of the table. 1.5, he said. "Final." A pause that felt about 6 years long. "Fine," Briggs said. "Fine," the representative said. The meeting was over in 11 minutes. Close enough. In the hallway afterwards, Sebastian walked with her to the elevator. They were alone for the first time since the meeting started. He pressed the button and stood there for a moment looking at the closed elevator doors. "Briggs has been in this business for 30 years, he said. "Nobody talks to him the way you just did." "Somebody should have started 30 years ago," she said. He's using anger as a negotiation tool because it usually works. It works until you name it, and then it stops working. He's not going to like you, Sebastian said. He doesn't have to like me, she said. He has to respect the outcome. That's different. The elevator opened. She stepped in. Nora. She turned. Sebastian was still standing in the hallway, one hand in his coat pocket, looking at her with an expression. She was starting to learn that particular stillness that meant he was about to say something he'd thought about carefully. The next meeting I need you for, it's not like these two. How is it different? She said. The people in the room will not be men like Briggs, he said. They will not respond to logic or naming what they feel. The temperature in that room is going to be very high before you even sit down. He paused. And the stakes are real. I need to know if that's something you can handle. She looked at him. The elevator was waiting. The doors hovered patient. Why are you telling me this now? She said. Because I want you to have all the information before you decide, he said. You told my men that the night we met. Remember, she did. She looked at him for a long moment, this careful, dangerous, unexpectedly honest man who had walked into her diner and upended the entire architecture of her life in the space of 20 minutes. Send me the details, she said. The elevator doors closed. She rode down alone, watching the floor numbers drop, and she thought about what Sebastian had said. The temperature in that room is going to be very high. She'd heard language like that before. Her father used to say it back when he was still working, back when the world he moved in still had edges she didn't fully understand. High temperature. It meant people who had already decided the outcome and were only in the room to perform the disagreement before doing what they'd already planned. Those rooms were different. She knew that, and she had said yes anyway, because she was 24 years old, and she had made herself a promise, and she had a very clear, very specific idea of what she was walking into, or she thought she did. She would realize in about 72 hours exactly how wrong she was. The details came at 11:47 p.m. Not a text. An email from an address she didn't recognize to a secondary account she hadn't given Sebastian and had no idea how he'd found. That alone told her something. The email had no subject line. The body contained two things: an address in Bridgeport and a single sentence. Thursday, 7 p.m. Do not be late. She read it 3 times. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the dark of her apartment and did something she almost never did. She let herself feel the fear. Not the surface kind, the electric, adrenaline-bright fear that came with guns and shouting and immediate danger. This was the deeper kind, the cold, slow fear of having walked far enough into something that you can no longer clearly see the way back out. She let herself feel it for exactly 4 minutes. Then she got up and started researching the address. It took her 2 hours to find what she was looking for, and what she found did not make the fear smaller. The building in Bridgeport had changed hands 3 times in 8 years, always through holding companies with names that sounded like law firms and resolved, if you followed them far enough, into nothing. The kind of nothing that took effort to construct. She found 2 news articles tangentially connected to the block, one about a city council dispute over zoning, one about a noise complaint filed and quickly withdrawn, and between them, in the specific shape of what was not said, she read the outline of something larger. This wasn't a negotiation between business partners. This was something with actual weight behind it. She called Sebastian at 2 a.m. She expected voicemail. He answered on the second ring, which meant either he didn't sleep or he'd been waiting for her to call, and neither option was particularly reassuring. The building in Bridgeport, she said without preamble. Tell me who owns it. A pause. Brief. How did you find the connection? Holding companies with no public officers are a red flag regardless of industry, she said. Who owns it? Another pause. Longer. A man named Dominic Rael. She knew that name. Everyone in certain parts of Chicago knew that name the same way they knew the Gallo name. Not from direct contact, but from the shape of the space around it. Dominic Rael was not in the same business as the Gallos. He was in a dirtier one with less infrastructure and considerably less patience for process. The Gallos moved money. Rael moved other things, things that left damage behind them. You're meeting with Rael, she said. I'm attempting to resolve a boundary dispute, Sebastian said. Rael's people have been encroaching on the north side for 6 months. It's gotten to the point where it needs to be addressed directly. Sebastian, she almost never used his first name. He noticed she could tell from the half-second duet before he responded. Rael doesn't do resolution meetings. He does meetings where he decides what he's already decided and dares you to argue. I know, Sebastian said. Then why are you going? Because not going is worse, he said. If I ignore the encroachment, it continues. If I respond with force, it escalates into something neither side can afford right now. The meeting is the middle path. And you want me in that room, she said. I need you in that room, he said. The distinction was deliberate. She understood it. Rael is emotional in ways he doesn't recognize in himself. His lieutenant, a man named Garrett Cross, is the one who actually runs the logistics, and Cross reads people as well as you do. Maybe better, he's going to be watching for leverage the entire time. I need someone watching him back. And if the meeting goes sideways, she said. The pause this time was different, careful in a different way. It won't, he said. I won't let it. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's not. A beat. If you want to pull out, Nora, pull out now. I mean that. Thursday doesn't change anything else. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about her father's voice on the phone, that lighter quality, that particular silence where the fear used to be. She thought about 2 words on the back of a business card. She thought about a promise she'd made to herself when she was 24 years old eating lukewarm soup at an empty counter. No more fear. I'll be there, she said. Wear something that doesn't announce that you're paying attention, he said. You want to look peripheral. I know what I want to look like, she said. Good night, Sebastian. She hung up. She did not sleep well, but she slept. Thursday arrived the way bad days always did, looking exactly like an ordinary one. Cold, flat light through the window. Traffic noise from the street below. The smell of her neighbor's coffee seeping through the wall. Nora got up, ran 4 miles, showered, and ate breakfast, standing at her kitchen counter the way she always did because she'd never owned a kitchen table and had never felt the lack of one until recently when she found herself wanting, for no reason she could articulate, something more solid to sit at. She got to the diner at noon. She worked her shift. She refilled coffee and rang up orders and listened to Dale talk about the new security system with the slightly dazed quality of a man who had spent his whole life avoiding spending money and had suddenly discovered peace of mind had a price tag. She laughed in the right places. She answered in the right places. She was, to anyone watching, completely present. Inside, she was already in the room in Bridgeport, moving through it, mapping the exits, reading the faces of men she hadn't met yet, calculating variables she couldn't fully know. At 5:30, she clocked out. At 6:15, a black car she didn't recognize pulled up outside her building. She got in. Paul was driving. The same Paul from the law office, suit, careful manner, eyes in the rearview mirror that were measuring without being threatening. Sebastian was in the back seat, and for a moment when she got in and the door closed and the car pulled away from the curb, the silence between them had a texture she hadn't felt before. Not uncomfortable, just waited. How are you, he said. Ready, she said. He nodded once. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to her. She opened it. 5 names, brief descriptions beside each one, 2 or 3 words, just enough to orient without overwhelming. Rael controls the room. Cross watches everything. 3 others loyal to Rael follow Cross's lead. The one to watch is Cross, Sebastian said. Everything I've told you. He's the one who actually knows why this meeting is happening, and it might not be what I think it is. She looked up from the paper. You think you're being set up? He met her eyes. I think it's possible, he said. I don't have enough information to know. That's what I need tonight. She folded the paper. She handed it back. If you think you're being set up, she said slowly, then walking in there is exactly what they want. Yes, he said, and you're doing it anyway. If I don't show up, he said, it confirms that I know, which means they move immediately instead of waiting. Showing up buys time, and it gives me a chance to read the room before they're ready for me to read it. He paused. Or it gives you that chance. She turned to look out the window. The city moved past the lights, the traffic, the ordinary machinery of 10,000 people going about their Thursday evenings, with no idea that in a building in Bridgeport something was being decided that would affect more lives than any of them would ever know. There's one more thing, Sebastian said. She turned back. If Cross makes a move, any kind of move, anything that signals the room is about to go in a direction I can't control, I need you to get out. His voice was level, factual. Paul will be close. You signal him, he gets you out. Don't argue, don't try to manage it. Just go. And you, she said. He looked at her steadily. I'll handle my part. You handle yours. She studied him for a long moment. This man who moved through the world with a kind of deliberate, contained authority that she had initially read as coldness, and was only now beginning to understand was something else entirely, was in fact the armor of a person who had learned very early that showing what you cared about was the fastest way to lose it. Okay, she said. The car stopped. They were there. And Dominic Rael was exactly what his reputation described, and nothing more, which was itself a kind of information. He was a large man, loud in a physical sense, the kind of loud that didn't require volume, just space with a handshake that was 1 degree too firm, and eyes that moved to dominance before the greeting was even finished. He welcomed Sebastian like a host who was also unmistakably the only person in the room who mattered. Nora he looked at for exactly 1 second before not looking at her again. Good. Peripheral was exactly where she wanted to be. Garrett Cross was another matter entirely. He was younger than she expected. Mid-30s, lean, with a stillness about him that was different from Sebastian's stillness, where Sebastian's was controlled, deliberate, built from the inside out. Cross's was watchful. Predatory in the specific way of a person who was always 3 moves ahead and always waiting for you to catch up. He shook her hand last, and when he did, his eyes held hers for exactly 1 beat longer than social convention required. He knew she was here for the same reason he was. He was telling her he knew. She held his gaze relaxed and neutral, gave nothing back, and moved to her seat. The meeting started. Rael controlled the opening, loud, expansive, the kind of energy that filled rooms by sheer volume. He talked about history, about relationships, about how long he and the Gallo family had managed to coexist in this city, about respect and its value. It was a performance, and it was a good one. Most people in the room, the 3 loyalists arranged on Rael's side of the table, were nodding along with the cadence of people who had heard this particular performance many times. Sebastian let him talk. He sat with his hands on the table, expression measured, giving Rael exactly enough reaction to feel heard and not a single fraction more. Nora watched Cross. Cross was not watching Rael. Cross had his phone on the table in front of him, screen down. He was watching Sebastian. But every 45 seconds or so, she timed it. His eyes moved to the door, not nervously, calmly, the way you check a clock when you're waiting for something you know is coming. Every 45 seconds. She kept her face completely still and her mind completely loud. Someone else was coming. The meeting had a scheduled interruption, and Cross was tracking the timeline. She looked at Paul, who was standing near the wall behind Sebastian, and she caught his eye. She moved her chin almost imperceptibly toward the door. Paul's expression didn't change, but he shifted his weight barely, just slightly, toward Sebastian's left. He'd understood. 14 minutes into the meeting, Rael's tone shifted. He moved from history and relationship into grievance. The encroachment Sebastian had come here to address, reframed entirely. In Rael's version, it wasn't encroachment at all. It was a natural expansion into territory that had been, as he put it, underutilized. He said the word with the specific satisfaction of someone who had rehearsed it and was pleased with the choice. Sebastian said, "We have a different understanding of the arrangement." "Arrangements evolve," Rael said. He spread his hands. "That's the nature of business." "Arrangements evolve through conversation," Sebastian said, "not through unilateral action." The temperature in the room moved up 3 degrees. One of the loyalists shifted in his seat. Cross's phone screen remained dark. His eyes moved to the door. Nora said quietly, calmly, cutting across the building tension like a wire through soft material. "Mr. Rael, I wonder if we could clarify the specific boundaries in question. If we're looking at the same geography and calling it different things, that's a much simpler problem than a fundamental disagreement." She slid a page across the table. It was a blank piece of paper she'd taken from the notepad in front of her. "Could you show me where the boundary sits in your understanding?" Everyone looked at the blank paper. The absurdity of the gesture, asking a man like Rael to draw on a blank page like a schoolchild, hung in the air for exactly 1 second. And then Rael laughed. It was surprised out of him, genuine, which made it more useful than anything rehearsed could have been. "She wants me to draw a map," he said to the room, still laughing. "It would be helpful," Nora said, pleasant and unruffled. Rael looked at Sebastian. "Where did you find her?" "She found me," Sebastian said. He was watching her with an expression she felt rather than saw, that particular quality of attention that she'd first registered across a diner counter and hadn't been able to stop registering since. Rael reached for the paper. He actually drew with the pen she'd set nearby, a rough boundary line. He was still half laughing, charmed by his own participation in something ridiculous. And in that charmed off-guard state, he drew a line that was 20% less aggressive than the position he'd been arguing for the last 15 minutes. Nora looked at it. "That seems much closer to what Mr. Gallo's people have been working with," she said mildly. The room went quiet. Cross's eyes snapped to the page. He'd seen it too, the accidental concession, the boundary that Rael had drawn in a moment of unguarded humor that contradicted the position he'd opened with. Rael saw it a second later. His expression went from amused to very still. "That was illustrative," he said. His voice had changed. "Of course," Nora said. "Should we use the map your team prepared instead?" Cross's hand moved toward his phone. And that was the moment, that tiny, precise movement, the hand reaching for the phone, that Nora had been waiting for. Not because the phone itself was the threat, but because Cross reaching for it now meant whoever was coming wasn't 45 seconds away anymore. They were close, the timeline had compressed. She looked at Sebastian. He was already looking at her. She moved her eyes to the door, once clean, unmistakable. Sebastian stood up. The room reacted instantly, chairs moving, bodies shifting. Rael's expression going from still to something harder and colder underneath. "I think," Sebastian said in the same, even unhurried tone he used for everything, "that we've made real progress today. I'd like to continue this conversation when we've both had time to review the parameters." He buttoned his coat. "Dominic, thank you for the meeting." Rael didn't stand. "We're not finished," he said. "We are for tonight," Sebastian said pleasantly. He was already moving. Paul was already at the door. Nora was on her feet, 3 steps behind Sebastian, moving with the same controlled, unhurried purpose. Cross said loudly for the first time, his voice cutting across the room like something sharp, "Gallo." Sebastian stopped. He turned. Cross was looking at him with that watchful, predatory stillness, and in his eyes was something that looked almost like professional admiration. "Nice read," he said. He glanced at Nora. It was brief, but it said everything. Sebastian inclined his head once, and they walked out. The car was moving within 90 seconds of them clearing the building. Paul drove fast, not recklessly, the kind of fast that was practiced and specific. Sebastian sat back in his seat with his eyes closed for 30 full seconds, the only sign she'd ever seen from him of something approaching relief. Then he opened them and looked at her. "How long had you known?" "Cross was watching the door every 45 seconds, she said. Someone was coming. The meeting was going to be interrupted, and the interruption wasn't going to be friendly." She paused. "When he reached for his phone, I figured we had maybe 2 minutes. "We had less than that," Sebastian said. "There were 2 of Rael's people in the parking structure. They were expecting us to still be in the room." He looked at her. "You pulled the concession out of Rael without him understanding what he'd done." "For about 8 seconds, she said, before he caught it. 8 seconds was enough, he said. "It showed Cross that Rael can be managed. That's information Cross will use." Sebastian paused. "It also means Rael is going to be angry when he works through what happened tonight." "Probably," she said. "That's going to create a problem." "It was always going to create a problem," she said. "The difference is, now you have documentation, or the ghost of it, of a more moderate position from Rael's own hand. You can work with that." Sebastian was quiet. The city moved past the windows, dark and lit and ordinary and not. After a while, he said, "Cross is going to look into you now." "I know," she said. "That concerns me." "It should concern you," she said, "but not more than it concerns me. I can manage my own exposure." "Nora," something in his voice had changed, quieter, more deliberate. "What happened tonight, what you did in that room, that wasn't consulting?" "That was something else." She looked at him. "I know what it was. You saved us from walking into something very bad," he said. "I want to be honest with you about what that means. The people in that room know what you can do now. That changes your position in this, regardless of what you want it to be." The car was slowing. They were near her building. She could see the blink of the laundromat sign 2 blocks down, familiar, reliable, flickering its ordinary light into the ordinary dark. "I know," she said again. "Are you afraid?" he said. Not unkindly. She thought about it honestly the way she always did. She took the fear and looked at it clearly in all its specific and legitimate dimensions. Yes, she said. He nodded, like that was the right answer. Good, he said. Fear means you understand the situation. Keep understanding it. She got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk and watched the car until it disappeared around the corner. Then she turned and walked toward her building. Hands in her pockets, chin level, the cold air on her face like something clarifying. She understood the situation. She understood it better than Sebastian knew. Better maybe than she'd let herself admit until tonight, until that moment in the car when he'd said that was something else and she'd heard in his voice a line being crossed that neither of them had entirely planned for. The truth was simple, and she'd known it for days. She wasn't a consultant anymore. She was something that didn't have a clean name, something that lived in the space between the world she'd come from and the world she'd walked into, and the bridge between them was narrowing behind her with every meeting, every room, every decision made in the specific stillness of a moment when everything mattered and nothing could be taken back. She went inside. She locked the door. She leaned against it in the dark of her apartment just for a moment and let herself feel the full weight of all of it. Then she straightened up and she started thinking about what came next. She didn't sleep that night either, but this time, it wasn't fear keeping her awake. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives after a long period of fog, sudden clean, almost violent in its precision. She lay on her back in the dark and she thought about every decision she'd made in the last 2 weeks, laid them out in order, like cards on a table, and she looked at them honestly. Not with regret, not with justification, just honestly. She had walked into Sebastian Gallo's world with her eyes open, telling herself she was doing it for her father, telling herself it was temporary, telling herself the line between observing and participating was a clear one that she could see and respect and maintain. Tonight had shown her what she already knew, but hadn't yet said out loud there was no line. There had never been a line. The moment she opened her mouth in that diner and talked 3 armed men into leaving, she had already crossed whatever line she thought existed. She just hadn't been in a room complicated enough to show her yet. She got up at 5. She made coffee. She sat at her kitchen counter, still no table, still hadn't bought one, and she waited for the thing she knew was coming. It came at 6:03 a.m. Not a text, a knock at her door. She didn't startle. She set down her coffee cup and walked to the door and looked through the peephole and saw standing in the hallway of her apartment building at 6 in the morning, not Sebastian, not Paul, not anyone connected to the gallows. Detective Daniel Reyes. She opened the door. He looked like he'd been up all night. His jacket was the same one from the police station, and he had the particular worn-through quality of a man running on caffeine and a very specific kind of urgency. In his hand was a paper coffee cup from the place on the corner that she recognized by the logo, which meant he'd been in the neighborhood long enough to get coffee first, which meant he'd been building up to this. "Detective," she said, "early. Can I come in?" he said. She stepped back. He came in. He looked around her apartment with the automatic professional assessment she'd seen cops do everywhere, not searching, just cataloging, and then he turned to face her and cut straight to it. "The Bridgeport meeting last night," he said. Her face stayed exactly where it was. "I don't know what you mean. Nora." His voice was tired and direct. "We've had eyes on Dominic Rael's operations for 8 months. The building on Halstead has been on our radar for longer than that. Last night we had surveillance outside, and we have photographs of everyone who went in and out." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photo and held it up. It was her, getting out of the black car. Clear shot, good angle, unmistakable. She looked at the photograph. She looked at Reyes. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated like he hadn't expected that. "Just okay." "What do you want me to say, Detective?" He lowered the photo. He ran a hand over his face. "I want you to tell me what you're doing," he said. "I want you to tell me how a waitress from a West Side diner ends up in a room with Sebastian Gallo and Dominic Rael 12 days after an armed robbery." His voice was not accusing. It was genuinely, almost desperately trying to understand. "Because the picture in my head right now is one I don't want to have." "What picture is that?" she said. "That you're in over your head," he said. "That someone used that robbery, used the exposure from it to bring you into something you don't fully understand." She studied him for a moment. He was a good detective. He had good instincts. And he was, she could see, plainly, genuinely concerned, not performing concern for leverage, not building toward an arrest, just worried. About her specifically, which was its own kind of complication. I understand my situation, she said carefully. Completely. Nora, I'm not going to give you a statement, detective, she said. Not because I'm protecting anyone, because I don't have anything to say that would help you and wouldn't hurt me. She paused. But I want you to hear me when I tell you that I am not a victim in this. I made choices. They were informed choices, and I'm still making them. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. I can help you, he said, if you're in a position where you need... I'm not, she said. I know that's frustrating. It's terrifying, he said with a bluntness that surprised her. You are 24 years old and you are extraordinarily good at making dangerous situations feel manageable, which is the most dangerous quality a person can have in your current circumstances. She blinked. It was the most accurate thing anyone had said to her in weeks. I'll think about that, she said, quietly, and she meant it. Reyes stood there for another moment, clearly wanting to say more, clearly, knowing he'd reached the end of what he could offer without her meeting him halfway. He put the photograph back in his jacket. He picked up his coffee cup. My number's the same as it was, he said. Call it. I know, she said. He left. She locked the door. She stood with her forehead against it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Sebastian. He answered immediately. Reyes came to see you. Yes, she said. How do you know? Because he came to see me 40 minutes ago, Sebastian said. He's building a case. Not on you, he doesn't have enough, and he knows it. But he's watching, and that means the timeline on several things I was planning has just compressed significantly. What timeline? She said. I need you to come in, he said, now. Sebastian, there are things I haven't told you, he said. His voice was different. The precision was still there, but something underneath it had shifted the way a surface shifts when the thing supporting it from below has changed. Things that are relevant to your position and that I should have told you earlier. I'm telling you now. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She was there in 35. The law office was different. At 7 a.m., quieter, emptier. The receptionist not yet at her desk. The hallways holding the particular hush of a place that existed in 2 different modes and hadn't yet switched into the daytime one. Paul let her in. He looked like he hadn't slept either. She was beginning to wonder if anyone in Sebastian Gallo's orbit slept. Sebastian was in the conference room. No folder this time, no coffee. He was standing at the window with his hands in his pockets, and when she came in, he turned around and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. He looked tired, not physically, something underneath. Sit down, he said. Tell me first, she said. Then I'll decide if I want to sit. He nodded once. He moved to the table but didn't sit either. He stood at the end of it with his hands flat on the surface and he said without preamble, Garrett Cross contacted me this morning. Before you called. He wants a separate meeting. Without Rael. She went very still. Cross is moving against Rael. He's been moving against Rael for 6 months, Sebastian said. The encroachment on the north side wasn't Rael's strategy. It was Cross's. Cross has been pushing the operation further than Rael authorized, running it through Rael's name and building leverage to take over the entire organization. He paused. Last night, when you pulled the concession from Rael, when you showed Cross that Rael could be cornered, you gave Cross exactly the evidence he needed. Proof that Rael's judgment is compromised, that he can be managed by a 24-year-old woman in a meeting he thought he controlled. The silence in the room was enormous. I handed Cross a weapon, she said. You didn't know, Sebastian said. I didn't tell you the full picture. That's on me. Why didn't you tell me? He was quiet for a moment. Because if you'd known, you would have played the room differently, and I needed you to play it the way you naturally would without a strategy layered on top, because Cross would have seen through a strategy. He looked at her steadily. I used your instincts. Without your full consent, I know what that is. The honesty of it landed harder than anger would have. She looked at him across the table, this man who was careful and controlled and unexpectedly principled in the specific limited way of someone who had built a code in a world that didn't offer one, and she felt something shift in the architecture of how she understood him. What does Cross want? She said. An alliance, Sebastian said. He wants to move against Rael with Gallo backing. In exchange, the north side encroachment ends. His operation aligns with ours. Clean boundary documented agreement. And what do you want, she said. I want to know if Cross is trustworthy enough to make that deal with, he said. And I want to know it before I walk into a room with him. He met her eyes. You already read him once. I read him in a room where he wasn't trying to hide, she said. A direct meeting is different. I know, he said. Will you come? She put her hands on the table opposite to his. They were standing on the same side of it now, which felt significant in a way she didn't fully examine. If I come to this meeting, she said slowly, and it goes the way I think it might. Cross is smart, he's strategic, and he is absolutely going to try to read what I am to you, then my position in all of this stops being ambiguous. She paused. People are going to know what I do, what I am. Reyes already suspects it. Cross will confirm it. Rael will eventually find out, and Rael is going to be angry at both of us for what happened in that room. Yes, Sebastian said. He didn't cushion it. I could walk away, she said. Right now, you told me that was still an option. It is, he said, and she heard underneath the precision something that cost him something to hold level. It will always be an option. That is not a negotiable term. She looked at him for a long moment. The tiredness under his surface. The care he took with the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. The way he'd said, I used your instincts and hadn't tried to make it smaller than it was. You should have told me about Cross from the beginning, she said. I know, he said. I'm sorry. She'd never heard him say that before. She suspected it was not a word he used often or lightly. I'm coming to the meeting, she said, but going forward everything. I need everything. No managed information, no calculated omissions. She held his gaze. If I'm in this room with you, I need the same room you're standing in, not a version of it. Something moved across his face. It was not quite relief. It was something more complicated, the expression of a man who had operated alone for so long that being asked to share the full weight of something felt both terrifying and underneath that, like setting down a thing he'd been carrying for too long. Agreed, he said. Everything. She nodded once. When is Cross coming? An hour, he said. Then tell me what you actually know about him, she said. All of it. Start now. He sat down. She sat down across from him. And for the next 50 minutes, Sebastian Gallo told her everything, every piece of intelligence, every history, every risk, invariable and unknown, with the specific, unguarded directness of a man who had just made a decision he intended to keep. Cross arrived exactly on time, which itself was information. Punctuality in men like Cross wasn't courtesy, it was control. He walked in and assessed the room in the time it took most people to take off their coat, and then he sat down and looked at Nora and said with no pretense at all, I want to speak with you directly. Go ahead, she said. What happened in Rael's meeting last night, he said. The concession, the boundary on the paper. That wasn't an accident. No, she agreed. You knew what you were doing. I usually do, she said. Cross leaned back. He was measuring her openly without the pretense of casual conversation, and she let him because she was measuring him right back, and she didn't see any reason to pretend otherwise. You're not what I expected, he said. Nobody ever is, she said. A beat. Then Cross turned to Sebastian. I'll make this direct. I want Rael out. I've been building toward it for a year. Last night confirmed what I needed. He can't hold the organization. He makes bad decisions under pressure. And he's going to get people arrested or killed within 18 months. He laid it out flatly without drama. I want Gallo backing. In exchange, the north side is yours, the boundary is clean, and my operation runs parallel, not intersecting. No conflict. Why would I trust that arrangement? Sebastian said. Because I've been running Rael's logistics for 4 years, and he doesn't know half of what I know, Cross said. I could have burned the gallows twice in that time if I'd wanted to. I didn't. He paused. And because she'll be able to tell you whether I'm lying. Both men looked at her. He's not lying, she said. Cross's eyes moved to her a flicker of something. Surprise, maybe, that she'd said it that directly. But that's not the full picture, she continued. You're not doing this for the organization. You're doing it because Rael knows something about you, something that gets worse for you the longer he stays in power. She watched Cross's face with the focused attention she'd given to every face in every room for 2 weeks. Whatever he knows, you need him gone before he decides to use it. The silence that followed was the loudest she'd heard yet. Cross looked at her for a very long time. You're right, he said finally, flat, quiet. It doesn't change the terms. No, she agreed. It doesn't. It just means both sides know what the real motivations are. She looked at Sebastian. Which makes the agreement more stable, not less. Sebastian looked at Cross. 48 hours, he said. I want documentation of the North Side operation, all of it going back 6 months. Proof of what you've said about Rael's exposure. Then we talk terms. Cross nodded. He stood. He put on his coat. At the door he stopped and he looked at Nora one more time with that watchful, precise attention that she'd first seen across a table in Bridgeport and recognized immediately as the gaze of someone who met very few people they considered equal. You should charge more, he said. She looked at him. I'll take that under advisement. He left. The room was quiet. Sebastian sat back in his chair and looked at her with the expression she'd been learning to read, the one that was not quite a smile and not quite admiration and was something more specific than both. He's right, Sebastian said. About the price, she said. About all of it. He paused. What do you want, Nora? Not what your father needs. Not what the arrangement requires. What do you want from this? She'd been waiting for that question, not from him specifically, from herself. She'd been circling it for days, coming at it from different angles, and she'd always stopped just short of answering it honestly. She answered it now. I want to matter, she said. Not in the way a waitress matters, not invisibly, not in a way that disappears the moment the shift ends. I want to be in rooms where real decisions get made, and I want to be there because I'm genuinely the best person to be there. Not as a favor, not as a novelty. She paused. And I want to do it in a way I can live with. The last part is the hard one, Sebastian said. I know, she said. That's why I'm saying it out loud. So you know it's a condition, not a preference. He looked at her steadily. I can work with that. Good, she said. She reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the business card, the original one, the one with the phone number on one side, and you're wasted on the other, and she set it on the table between them. I want a real contract, she said. Written, legal, compensation commensurate with the actual risk. Scope of work clearly defined. She held his gaze. And if I ever walk into a room that crosses a line I've drawn, I walk out and the contract honors that. No consequences. Sebastian looked at the card on the table between them. He looked at her. I'll have Paul draft it today, and he said. Have your lawyer draft it, she said. Not Paul, an actual lawyer. The corner of his mouth moved. You know I have actual lawyers. I know you have lawyers who work for you, she said. I want one who works for me. This time he did smile. It was small and controlled and entirely genuine, and it changed his face in a way that caught her slightly off guard, made him look for just a moment like a person rather than a position. I'll arrange it, he said. She stood. She picked up the business card. She held it for a moment, this small, unremarkable piece of cardstock that had started everything that she'd found at the bottom of her apron pocket at 4 a.m. after a robbery that should have broken her and hadn't. She put it back in her pocket. I'll be in touch, she said. Nora! She stopped at the door. Sebastian was still sitting, both hands on the table, and he spoke with the careful deliberateness of a man who had decided to say a true thing instead of a useful one. The night in the diner. When you held that room, I've been in this business my entire adult life, and I have never seen anything like it. Not from men with 20 years of experience. Not from anyone, Basto. He paused. I want you to know I understand what you gave up to walk into this, and I don't take it lightly. She looked at him for a long moment. I know you don't, she said. She walked out. She went back to the diner that evening. Not because she had a shift. She didn't. She went because it was the place where everything had started, and she wanted to see it. Really see it, not through the urgency of crisis or the blur of routine, but clearly with all of it in perspective. Dale was behind the counter doing inventory. He looked up when she came in, surprised, and then he looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him put down his clipboard and say nothing for a moment. You okay? He said finally. Yeah, she said. I think I'm going to have to leave Dale. He looked at her for a long time. He wasn't a complicated man, Dale. He was practical and decent, and he cared about the people who worked for him in the specific, unspoken way of someone who showed up every day and didn't say much, but remembered everything. He'd given her the job when she was 19 and had a resume with nothing on it but desperation. He'd never once made her feel small for it. "Where are you going?" he said. "Somewhere I'm more useful," she said. He picked up his clipboard. He looked at his inventory sheet. "You're going to want health insurance," he said gruffly. "Don't let whoever it is skip out on health insurance." She felt something warm move through her chest. "I won't," she said. "And call me if you need anything," he said. He didn't look up. "I mean that." "I know you do," she said. She walked out of this West Side diner for the last time as someone who worked there, and she stood on the corner of Pulaski and Ohio in the cold night air, and she looked up at the blinking sign. Still blinking, still reliable, still the same, and she took one long, slow breath of air that tasted like exhaust in winter and the specific, irreplaceable smell of a city that never quite decided whether it was trying to crush you or carry you. Then she straightened her spine, put her hands in her pockets, and walked into whatever came next. 3 weeks later, Garrett Cross delivered the documentation on Rael's operation. 2 weeks after that, Dominic Rael stepped down from the leadership of his organization under circumstances that were never made public, citing health reasons that no one believed and everyone accepted. The North Side boundary dispute was resolved quietly in a document signed by people whose names would never appear in any public record. Detective Daniel Reyes got a tip, anonymous, precise, more useful than anything he'd gathered in 8 months of surveillance, that led to 3 arrests in Rael's organization that had nothing to do with the gallows and everything to do with things Garrett Cross needed cleaned up before he took over. Reyes would spend the next 6 months trying to trace the tip's origin. He would never find it. Arthur Carver was quietly removed from his position and replaced. He kept the money he'd skimmed, which was, as these things went, an unusually generous resolution. And Nora Hayes, 24 years old, daughter of Vincent, former waitress, the calmest person in any room she'd ever walked into, signed a contract on a Tuesday afternoon in a lawyer's office that had nothing to do with the gallows, with a lawyer who worked entirely for her for compensation, that made the lawyer raise her eyebrows and made Nora feel for the first time in her life that the world had correctly calculated what she was worth. She kept the business card, not as a reminder of how it started, not as a souvenir. She kept it because it said something true on the back of it in precise and unexpected handwriting, and she intended to make sure that every room she walked into for the rest of her life would eventually have to agree. She had been wasted. She never would be again.